When Fiji goes to prayer, it seems the whole of Fiji goes to prayer. It is as if those brave, driven Christian missionaries who converted cannibals into Methodists still hold the people in sway. They arrive in farm trucks to worship. For this is strict Sunday, and under military decree, no public transport is permitted. It's just one of the major changes in Fiji, once the still center of the South Pacific, but now the victim of 2 military coups in less than 6 months. The new constitution will give more parliamentary seats to the Fijians so that the Indian half of the population will be excluded from real political power. The fundamentalist backlash means that the only things that move on Sundays are people on their way to worship. For Fiji's lavish resort hotels, lack of trade is more than just a Sunday phenomenon. The tourists have been frightened away. The sun lounges are empty. The pools deserted, even now in high season. The new military leaders boasted that the coups were bloodless, that they had done it the Fijian way. They had also sparked off riots, broken some Indian heads, and shattered the harmony of their country.
Fijian police and their long batons. Rocks flew and the crowd scattered.
These scenes of violence were unprecedented in a country noted for its smiling people and political stability. The military coups may have been bloodless, but they still left scars behind, both psychological and physical. The man who once worked here, Dr. Karam Singh, was one of the most respected Indian doctors in the country. His property was one of many Indian houses burned down during the riots. Dr. Singh and his family are now safely in New Zealand. But for the Indians left behind, there is still today real fear. How could all this violence have happened in paradise? How indeed could it have happened just a few meters away from the headquarters of the Methodist Church in Fiji? The answer was simple. It could happen if you believed it was ordained by God.
I am not really a fanatic as most people would like to believe, and I'm no extremist. I believe that if you asked a few more people around, they will say that I'm a real moderate, but could a moderate execute 2 coups? Perhaps the answer could be yes, if he firmly believes that it is the calling of God.
Christianity has used it very effectively to legitimize the coup. Colonel Rambuka and some of the more pernicious characters in his government have said it's God's will. God this, God that.
This religious struggle is in the middle of the South Pacific. Fiji is a group of 300 islands midway between Australia and Hawaii. The population barely 750,000. 53% are Christian. Of those, 90% are Methodists. The London Wesleyan Society's own ship, the Triton, ferried missionaries around the globe. It brought the Methodists to Fiji in 1835 to be welcomed ashore by people who at the time were still eating each other. Methodism allied itself easily with the tribal traditions of the Council of Chiefs. By 1857, a third of the natives were converted to Christianity. Fiji ceded its sovereignty to the British in 1874. The colonial legacy is still evident today. The British expat cricket team is still called the Imperials. The British handed down their traditions of Westminster democracy as well as the rules of cricket. But by far their most significant bequest, as we now can see, was to impose on the native Fijians shiploads of Indian workers. The Indians embarked from Calcutta, indentured to work in the sugar plantations for 5- or 10-year contracts. Most were to stay forever. It was Sir Arthur Gordon, Fiji's first Governor-General, who brought them to the South Pacific. In Fiji, the Indians toiled on behalf of the colonial sugar refining company, a period the Fijian Indians still refer to as Narak, meaning hell. These Indian workers, now fourth-generation immigrants, still cut cane under the high Pacific sun for a few Fijian dollars a day. The workers in the fields are Indians, the owners of the land exclusively Fijians, who regard their land rights as God-given. The 1970 Constitution, granted at independence, reflected that belief. Indians were specifically excluded from having land or fishing rights. To that extent, they have always been second-class citizens in their own country. Despite, or perhaps because of, the harshness of the sugar farmer's life, here in the west of the main island near Nandi, there has always been peaceful coexistence and mutual respect between Indian farmers and their Fijian neighbors. Indeed, Fijians in the west are still deeply upset by the new discrimination against Indians. For this Indian family, it's a subsistence economy. Home is a corrugated iron shack, a sewing machine is a prized possession, and a carved-out tractor tire is a child's swing. The Indian farmer can never be master of all he surveys. He can't even own an acre of it. A few miles away in the Fijian village of Visesi, home pleasures are simple enough.
Breadfruit.
It is the Garden of Eden, with plentiful fruits of the earth wherever you look. The native Fijians are consequently very good at relaxing, cutting fruit from the trees, and smiling. For decades, as they eased their way through life, they failed to notice that the Indian workers were doing just that, working to improve their lot. In the Indian community, the work ethic and the feeling of belonging to Indian culture is instilled at school.
The dog was its master's pet. It was allowed to go into the house. It was allowed to sit on its master's knee. Its master gave it the nastiest pieces of food. The ace was not allowed to go into the house.
Right, sit down. Next.
Indian boys and girls, though, see themselves as Fijian citizens, not least because their fathers run the economy of the country. In most major cities, hardly a single shop is owned by native Fijians. So until a few months ago, Fiji existed on a singular compromise. The indigenous Fijians owned the land and enjoyed the fruits of the land. The Indians had the money. The system appeared to work as long as the Fijians dominated the government. But tensions were building. The economic success of the Indians was becoming an irritant. In November 1986, Pope John Paul II visited Fiji, calling it a symbol of hope for the world, where different races could live in harmony. In April 1987, that hope was shattered when Dr. Bavandra won the election. As leader of a coalition of Indians and Fijians, he granted the Indians real political power, even promising the unthinkable, reform of land rights. After 1 month, Brigadier Rambuka stepped in.
I have taken the only option left to me. That is to go ahead and steer our beloved nation towards perhaps becoming a republic. I have taken this course because of the pressing need to to give this nation direction.
One half of Brigadier Rambuka's beloved nation, the Indian half, reacted by trying to destroy the vital sugarcane crop, the main economic weapon they had in their power. The military message was brutally simple. Parliament would be rigged so that the Fijians would always hold the majority. The Fijians were turning on the Indians to exclude them from power. Fierce race riots ensued.
What started as a peaceful prayer meeting in central Suva turned into violence with the arrival of about 100 angry Fijians. Armed soldiers and police stood by as the Fijians went on the rampage. From the relative safety of the Suva Travel Lodge, journalists watched as Fijians beat Indians. Panicked, the Indian crowd scattered in fear.
At the same time, just a few yards away from the Travelodge Hotel, beside government buildings, one bunch of rioters reverted to their historical roots, digging a cannibal pit in which they threatened to cook their enemies. Dr. Bavandra's spokesman, Richard Naidu, was one of many who suffered.
Well, I tend to relate it by saying that I've been arrested twice, ambushed by the army, assaulted right here in the Travelodge, and firebombed all in the space of 3 months, and that's quite enough.
What happened to Indian colleagues of yours?
They were routinely arrested, harassed, subjected to questioning, imprisoned. Many were abused racially. Since the second coup particularly, a number of my friends who are senior civil servants or senior public sector people have lost their jobs, have retired or been resigned. And the result is that most are very unwilling to confront these authorities.
Brigadier Rambuka and the people behind him profess a deep Christian faith. Methodism is not a backdrop to the coups. It holds center stage. There is nothing half-hearted or cynical about Rambuka's Sunday devotions. But then here, he is close not just to God, but also to his people and the tribal system they still live by. At the Methodist Church in Kanoya, he came to take part in a 3-hour church service. During this marathon of worship, each tribal group brought songs and prayers to present to Rambuka, their high chief and their preacher. Today, preaching an Old Testament lesson that closely mirrors what they see as their own predicament.
The words of Jeremiah the prophet, Lamentations chapter 5. Remember, O Lord, what has happened to us. Look at us and see our disgrace. Our property is in the hands of strangers. Foreigners are living in our homes. Our fathers have been killed by the enemy, and now our mothers are widows. Driven hard like donkeys or camels, we are tired, but are allowed no rest.
Rambuka preaches every week throughout the islands. His Fijian flock packs the churches. Many believe that he was given to them by God at this time in their history. Others believe he is manipulating the church for his own ends. Church and army are closely bound together. The soldiers even adorn their guns with stickers saying, "Jesus cares." At the Methodist Church, the General Secretary is a spiritual counselor and close friend of Rambuka. Does it sit easily with the church to condone a military government?
I mean, this, as far as I can see, There's nothing wrong with the military government as long as it provides the kind of security for property and for the life for the citizens of this country. I mean, it's not the kind of military government that you see in Africa, say for instance, or in Latin America for that matter, or in other parts of the world. I mean, nobody had been shot dead by this military government. But the military government has provided the security that we badly need at this time, at this point in our history.
The General Secretary's easy acceptance of Rambuka's military government and its racist overtones has split the Methodist Church.
We have come to the first Sunday in Advent in Fiji, 1987.
There is still a message of hope in the multiracial harmony at the Wesleyan Church in Suva.
For our world to live with this great fact of our faith, that Christ has come.
In the midst of all this Christian division, the Reverend Aquila Yambaki has stood his ground. He's a senior minister of the Methodist Church who's lived abroad, including 6 years in Britain.
When we do that, we are losing sight of the nature of Christ's coming.
He was so appalled by the coups that in letters to the press he dared to compare Rambuka's regime with the Nazis.
The message was that to change the system at the point of a gun was not the way of Christ, and we need to change things within the system. I did not argue that there was no need for change. Obviously, there was need for change. I think I would share the conviction that the Fijians are perhaps marginalized in their own country, but we've had 17 years of trying to change that, and why couldn't we do it? We pursue it the same way. Change, bring about changes by democratic ways.
Christ, keep you in eternal life. Blood of Christ, keep you in eternal life.
The deposed Prime Minister, Dr. Bavandra, now effectively exiled in the west of the island, also believes in the way of democracy and that all men are equal in the eyes of God.
As a Fijian and as Prime Minister, democratically elected in the last election to lead this country, I look at the first coup and the second coup as both to be illegal acts, unchristian acts, unchiefly acts, and both shouldn't have really taken place.
When you say it was an unchristian act, what do you mean by that?
In the minds of many Fijians that I have spoken to since the first coup, they said that they translated the coup and the taking over of a government that they elected as an act of theft. They felt that they were cheated by a group of Fijians, the army, and that they should not be forgiven for that, for what they did.
Draft commanding officer, officers, warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and men of the 6th drafts, bound for the 1st Battalion, Fiji Infantry Regiment in Lebanon.
In a country where waiting for the coconut to fall is regarded as a strenuous activity, the army is remarkably efficient. Fijian soldiers, including Rambuka, have made their mark as UN peacekeepers in the Lebanon. At this parade, he was still head of the Fijian Republic, dispatching his troops to the Middle East. The soldiers are nearly all native Fijians, which graphically illustrates the great divide in power between the races. While that may once have been acceptable, the coups have extended racial inequality to a point that some now see as totally unacceptable.
I think it's a racist act, and I would like to stand by saying that. I mean, you can justify it by going back to the Old Testament, but it's the same thing that they have done in history. They've justified it theologically. It can be justified theologically, but I think the justification stands in the way of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is the gospel of reconciliation and of love and of justice based on love. caring for the minorities, regardless of which race they come from. That to me is something that is missing, and that we can easily be silent on the Christian teaching and pick and choose, be selective about the way we use the Bible to prove our own ends. I mean, the devil can quote the Bibles. And I think that is, to a certain degree, that is what is happening in this country.
Well, I mean, that's a matter of individual opinion. But one has to see, overall view of the Fijian society and the relationships with other people. It's wrong to say that this is a racist. I mean, the movement now is racist. I mean, everyone is a racist. Even the British are racist. And you know that. Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you're racist because you look at the Pakis, they were there, the West Indians were there, I was there, and I experienced the racist attitude of the British people as a whole.
But as a citizen, you can vote, and you can vote for whichever party you like, and you have a reasonable chance that that party might get into power at some point.
And that is what is going to happen here. Everybody is going to vote.
So the Indians can have power again?
Well, if they win the majority.
But Rambuka's new constitution will ensure the Indians can never win the majority. So aren't the Fijians behaving like the white South Africans?
If the South Africans or the native South Africans were fighting against the imposition of an immigrant race as the government, that would be parallel to what we're doing here.
Well, in a sense, you've answered my next question, which was that don't you perceive that in the long term, it's possible that Fiji will be seen as operating its own version of apartheid against the Indians?
Isn't that positive discrimination?
Don't you think it will be perceived by other nations as being simply a racist discrimination?
Perhaps the difference would be an immigrant race as opposed to an indigenous race.
But the Indians, and Fijians like Dr. Bavandra and his wife, want to know how long it takes to become a genuine citizen of Fiji. Isn't 4 generations as an immigrant long enough?
We believe that all men are created equal, irrespective of color or race. And this is why I think that it's most ungodly to treat another race as being subordinate to the other.
The majority of Fijians are deeply religious people. And I told you earlier on how they interpreted the coup as an unchristian act. And the clear message from them is that something should be done to return the elected government, and also that those who are responsible for this coup be punished.
Not only are those Dr. Bavandra criticizes unlikely to be punished, they are apparently being blessed by the church. It's prize-giving day at the Leilin Methodist School. A junior Sitiveni Rambuka has to hang around because his mother teaches here. This is a rare prize to a Fijian boy. Most of the awards go to the Indian students, the very people Rambuka wants to disenfranchise.
If disenfranchising them means that they cannot become prime minister, well, I'm sorry about it. But I believe the people of England will now probably also be looking forward, or not looking forward, to the day when an Asian immigrant might become prime minister of England. Will that be possible? It will be possible according to your constitution.
Yes.
Well, you don't have a constitution.
But it is possible under our electoral law that could happen.
Yes.
It will not be possible under the new constitution here.
It will not be possible here, no.
Does that give you, as a Christian, any doubts?
No. No, it does not.
Tama. Wow. Oi, oi.
Brigadier Rambuka is disturbingly certain of his Christian faith and its strong links with his tribal ancestry. This ceremony last month to herald the arrival of Rambuka at the Methodist Theological College reflected the welcome accorded to the first missionaries when they came ashore. It was immediately apparent that Christianity only goes back to the 19th century in Fiji. These rituals, like the pounding of the kava root to make a narcotic drink, go back to the edge of time. Here, though, is a synthesis of all the tensions in Fijian society. The grass-skirted natives are not what they seem. They're Methodist theological students. The guest of honor was not a Christian missionary, but a military governor. The tribalism is never far behind the Christian teaching. Doubtless it was the skill of the original missionaries in harnessing tribal ritual to Christian worship which helped Christianity to spread so quickly and so deeply through Fijian society. Here in a religious college, the head of the military government was being accepted as a tribal high chief. So Brigadier Rambuka can be a military leader, a lay preacher, and a tribal chief. But his most important function to Fijians is as guardian of their land and fishing rights, what they call the Vanua, an almost mystical idea, a South Pacific chosen people. The group who have preyed on the ordinary Fijians' fear of losing their land rights are called Tauke. It means owners of the land. They are extremist and uncompromising about the God-given Vanua. The Reverend Tomasi Raikivi is one of their leaders.
If a Fijian cannot identify his portion of land and fishing rights, he can never be a Fijian. He must belong to a tribe. He must belong to a clan. A tribe and a clan which has a unique culture. He must belong to one of that. And if he doesn't, then he himself is a foreigner in the land.
The Vanua was given by God. And that being our belief, we believe we're not being unfair to anybody. We're just looking after what we rightly believe or wrongly believe, whichever way you look at it. But we firmly believe is given to us by God.
There was a small group of people, an elite group, who couldn't stomach the fact that they'd lost power and who were able to manipulate a large chunk of the Fijian population through this fear of losing their land, their customs, their rights to this and that, when they're all adequately protected in the Constitution. People were manipulated, and the armed forces, and I believe Rambuka himself, were manipulated.
An innocent question to Raikivi about his support for Rambuka brought a surprising confession about his involvement in the coup.
So, are you yourself personally completely behind
what has happened and behind Brigadier Rambuka and his people?
Trying to reveal my own secrets. I wouldn't deny it. I wouldn't deny it.
Why do you feel that what he has done is right?
I don't know whether it was him or us. Now, we fought for it, and he supported. Or he took over, and then we supported him. Because we knew he was fighting for that justice. So we were willing to go with him all the way.
The military government contained no fewer than 6 ministers who had criminal records. It was this government which Raikivi, a Christian minister, endorsed by supporting Rambuka's coups. The recent return to civilian government merely shows that the old order never changes. Ratusa Panaya Ganilau is still head of state as president. Ratusa Kamasese Mara is again prime minister. But they are no longer democratic leaders. From the splendors of Government House, they must reconstruct a country where Indian shops have been firebombed and the Indians are still being persecuted. Many Indians, among them prominent leaders, have confessed that they're just too frightened to talk to us. But eventually, a few did.
I came to his place after the first coup, and they went and searched his house, and they beaten him up.
What were they looking for?
Dynamite. They were looking for dynamite.
And how badly was he hurt?
कितना चोट में लगा?
पसड़ी मारे हैं, 3 पसड़ी क्रैक भेजा और यहाँ गोड़ में.
Yes, they hit him in the chest. He had 3 broken ribs and also in his leg. They used the bayonet of the gun, and it went through a deep gash in his leg.
And did they find any dynamite? Did they find anything to charge him with?
तुम्हारे घर में कुछ मिला?
No, कुछ नहीं मिला.
What is his job?
पर धंधा क्या?
मछली मारना.
Fishing, sir.
Despite their shock at such treatment, the Indian Fijians were sufficiently self-possessed to collect medical reports on the victims of violence. The injuries described by the doctors are grimly consistent with beatings. The Fiji Independent News Network is based in Sydney. In October, it produced a list of some of the Indians who had been maltreated. They were not just the weak and vulnerable. They included magistrates, teachers, and doctors. The ill treatment included being forced to bathe in a sewage pool, having human excrement placed in their hands, being made to walk naked through the streets, being brutally beaten while under detention. 17 children accused of breaking the Sunday restrictions were beaten until they could no longer stand up. They were then made to rub their noses against coarse concrete floors until their noses bled. Other children were made to lick cow dung for the same offence. Amnesty International has catalogued similar atrocities.
One of my friends was taken by the army. When the army came looking for him, the wife said the husband was out. And the army saw him. And the wife was given a slap on the face, and she was, a gun, or a rifle, was pointed in on her neck. And then the son was taken by with them, and the army moved into the house. They searched the house, and they took $120 cash money, plus a pendant and a gold chain and a gold sovereign.
Are you frightened?
Oh, of course, why not? We are all frightened because we have went through hell. And would you believe me or not, but I never thought, I never even dreamt about it that this coup could take place in Fiji.
What have you done with your own close family?
Well, my wife and both children are away, and there are a lot of people who are leaving.
Will you go?
Oh, of course, yes. That is why I'm being hesitant of my photo being taken.
Indians are said to be leaving Fiji at the rate of 400 a month, and that's just the government's figure. Many Indian professional people have already sought sanctuary in Australia, New Zealand or North America. One of them is Fiji's former Attorney General, Sir Vijay Singh, now in exile in Sydney.
After the first coup, I was arrested twice. So was my partner and so were others. And our offices have been under constant surveillance. After the second coup, my partner has been arrested twice and tortured. Certain other members of my staff in my law office have been detained for varying lengths of time. My wife's sister was taken prisoner and kept in police cell for 2 days. Another relation of ours who worked with me treated in the same way. They've arrested my house girl, detained her for a day. Another friend of my wife's who was looking after our house while we were away has had the same experience. And all the advice that I'm receiving from friends and well-wishers, as well as some messages from some sensitive sources intended to be conveyed to me, is don't come back.
Home now is a 2-bedroom flat in Sydney. Sir Vijay and Lady Singh are existing on tourist visas. They are reluctant visitors, filling their time in the unlikely territory of Bondi Beach.
Fiji was our home. We know none other. It has been home for 4 generations of our people. And it's a traumatic experience to be unwelcome in your own home. And that's the way we feel.
How can the people responsible for this, Rambuka and his men, as Mrs. Bavandra calls them, how can they see themselves as Christians?
Now, how they justify it, I can't say. And I don't intend to say it in a derogatory fashion, but the thought has occurred to me whether this protestation of Christianity having been absorbed and imbibed by the native Fijian people is really true, or whether they have only learned the lines, whether they are Christians in the fabric of their personality, or they know how to say what verse and sing which hymn.
Another senior Indian politician put it more bluntly. Scratch these Christians, he said, and you find the cannibal underneath. Most Indians remain trapped in the tragedy of Fiji. The Fijians genuinely cannot see what the rest of the world will conclude, that their actions are racist, that they were given the Garden of Eden and they are turning it into a wilderness of intolerance.
Yeah, we have been through a lot. I have been through a lot as a result of the military coup. They've torn our souls apart, as it were, and I'm sure that it's the soul of this country that's been torn apart by Rambuka and his men.
I'm saddened that the church has not stood out right across the line, that the church has not been standing up for that gospel, which I believe could save this country from chaos.
The soldiers are back in their barracks, but the effect of not 1 but 2 military coups is undeniable. Whenever some political compromise which might restore Fiji to decency and democracy looks like succeeding, there will always be the threat that the brigadier will come out of his barracks again in the name of God.